Hi, you're with Truth News Radio Australia, and it is the 18th of June 2016. My name's Hereward Fenton. Great to be with you today. In today's show, folks, we're going to be looking at the issue of gays and Islam. And I'm going to be taking a perspective on this which is somewhat critical of what we're seeing in the alternative news kind of area. And it's not easy, and I don't like criticising other alternative news sources. But I feel it's become important. I feel now we've reached a point where the anti-Islam rhetoric that is being put forth by leaders within alternative news is actually doing a lot of damage. It's doing a lot of damage to their own credibility, and it's doing potentially an awful lot of damage to society, to the future of our society, where we are trying to, those of us who are awake, who have seen through so many of the lies and the deceptions of the mainstream media and the false left-right divide, are working towards better solutions for the future, a better approach, a better mental attitude to the world. But we're seeing from many of the leading lights of alternative news, they're dragging people into a mentality of intolerance and hatred. And I want to break it down. I want to analyse this, as I do with other forms of media disinformation. And believe me, it's very important. And everything I'm saying to you today needs to be taken extremely seriously. And please don't just brush it off. This is what I often find with many people when you engage with them in debate on internet forums and Facebook, etc. They just brush off important observations and important analysis because they have become locked in to a mental attitude. Now, for myself, I've changed my positions. I've altered my thinking so many times. And I still am. I'm still constantly re-evaluating how I see the world and how I see important topics like Islam. And I look at facts. I try to look at evidence. So let me begin by affirming a few things. Of course, there is a problem within Islam in relation to freedom generally, in relation to basic principles of human freedom, of religious freedom, of the separation of church and state. And these are most prominent in the Wahhabist Islamic states of the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, but less so in other countries. And one thing that's very important to understand is that there is a wide diversity of people in Islam. Even though the religious texts of Islam have a lot of things in them that are fundamentally, you would say, anathema to human civilization, to modern democracy, the diversity of views of people within Islam is still very, very large. But there is a lot of propaganda and a lot of rhetoric to say that that is not the case, to say that that all Islam is radical Islam, that there is no such thing as moderate Islam. So we're going to be deconstructing some of that today. I want to begin with a video put out, actually a couple of videos put out by Paul Joseph Watson in the wake of the Florida Orlando attacks. And I'll just play to you a couple of clips, and then I'll move on to some other analysis of the true facts of the situation with Islam and homosexuality.
Omar Mateen, somebody of Afghan descent, who of course is a Muslim and the religion of peace strikes. Again, imagine my shock. So the top trending hashtag on Twitter right now is gun control now. That's right, the trendies are already out in force trying to seize on that narrative. They don't seem to be as concerned about the fact that in 11 Islamic countries, gay people are executed. That's right, in 11 countries, state execution of homosexuals is still government policy. So where's the hashtag Stop Islam now? How many more innocent people need to die before we acknowledge that Islam has a violence problem?
Okay, now I'll just switch to another video that was put out a couple of days after that.
Remember the poll out of the United Kingdom just a couple of months ago. 52% of Muslims think that homosexuality should be outlawed. Look at the polls of Middle Easterners who actually live in the Middle East. Those who believe in Sharia law. In many countries, the majority of them think that stoning gay people to death is perfectly acceptable. In 11 Islamic countries, gay people are still killed as state policy. Where's the left on that? Why are they only upset about gay people being killed when it's done by someone in the United States and when they can blame it on the Second Amendment? Let's go through some other points here. So again, BBC slammed Trump for political point scoring.
Okay, I'm just going to now bring you an article by Glenn Greenwald, which gets into some of these points about Islam and other religions and other problems that there are with the attitude towards homosexuals around the world. The title of the article is "Stop Exploiting LGB Issues to Demonize Islam and Justify Anti-Muslim Policies." In the late 1990s, Eric Rudolph, raised Catholic and affiliated for a time with a Christian identity sect, bombed abortion clinics and a gay bar, insisting they were venues of immorality and evil. Last July, an Orthodox Jewish Israeli attacked the marchers in the Jerusalem LGBT Pride Parade, stabbing 6 of them, and one of them, a teenager, died of her wounds. Justifying his attacks by appealing to Talmudic punishments for homosexuality, he had just been released from a 10-year prison term for doing the same in 2005. Yesterday, a Christian pastor from Arizona, Stephen Anderson, praised the slaughter of 49 people in an Orlando LGBT club on the ground that homosexuals are a bunch of disgusting perverts and are pedophiles. Violent attacks on gay bars in the US have long been common, as sociology professor Gregor Mattson documented. The crime blotters of the gay press have always been punctuated by attacks on patrons at gay bars and continue to be today, including killings. In 2014, a brutal hate crime against a gay couple was carried out by staff and students at a Catholic high school. In overwhelmingly Catholic and evangelical Brazil, killing of trans women is now an epidemic. Now, there's a poll here. A 2015 Pew poll found that US Muslims were more accepting of homosexuality than evangelical Christians, Mormons, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, I'm presenting this evidence to you in good faith, and I trust that Glenn Greenwald is not out to deceive. He is generally regarded as a left-wing journalist, but he's one of the better journalists. I know there's a lot of criticism of left-wing views on this matter, as you've seen from Paul Joseph Watson's videos, where he says that the left is continually covering up for Islam and not not confronting the reality of radical Islam. But to some extent that is true, and I do see that happening, and I'm going to talk a little about that later in the show. But of course, Glenn Greenwald is gay, and he's been quite courageous and quite heroic in the work he's done to expose lies and crimes of state. So I tend to put quite a bit of trust in the facts that Glenn Greenwald has assembled. And of course, here we have a poll, and as you can see, we've got Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses less accepting of homosexuality than Muslims in the US. So this is something that Paul Joseph Watson isn't telling you about when he quotes a whole lot of statistics, sounding very informed. And this is, to me, what I see the real danger developing with alternative media sources which are very large, powerful, have huge followings, and people tend to believe that those who are within the alternative media have a higher degree of adherence to truth, that they have more integrity than what you see in the mainstream. And when someone comes on YouTube and quotes a whole lot of statistics, they will just be believed, they'll be accepted. And if you were to raise alternative views, they would brush you off and say, oh, that's just a left-wing attitude, you're just pushing this left-wing propaganda. You see, that is an ideological mindset. That is completely not a free, open-minded, intellectual position. It's the position of a bigoted, narrow-minded kind of mindset. And when we consider that there are at least 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, encouraging a bigoted, narrow-minded attitude towards Muslims is very reprehensible. I'd say it's bordering on evil, and that promoting these very one-sided views that are not properly researched, that is with cherry-picked data, is actually bordering on quite an evil type of thing to be doing. But of course, we've seen with so much else in the mainstream media that there is indeed so much evil that they are involved in. So everything has to be taken in balance. But this needs to be confronted, ladies and gentlemen. It is very, very important. Now, after we come from break, I'm going to continue with this article by Glenn Greenwald, and then I'll look into more aspects of the question of Islam and Islam and homosexuality versus Christianity and homosexuality. I think you'll find it very interesting. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're with Truth News Radio. Today the topic is homosexuality and Islam, and I'm looking into some of the facts and trying to counteract the rhetoric which is very one-sided that is coming from alternative media sources. And I played a clip there from Paul Joseph Watson. I could also play you a clip from Stefan Molyneux, but I don't think I'll bother. I think you probably already are aware of this, and there are a number of other people that have taken this line. And I should emphasize, it's really something that's developed over the last couple of years, which is really interesting when you consider that the threat of Islamic terrorism and radical Islam has been very big in the media and, of course, in the world for a long time. I mean, it got obviously massively huge after September 11, 2001, but even before then. But it's odd that that alternative media, in some cases, has jumped on this bandwagon since about 2014, and of course it sort of coincides with the rise of ISIS. But when you look at ISIS, the modus operandi, the connections between the CIA are so similar to the previous incarnations of Islamic extremism that it's foolish to take a different interpretation of it. And of course, the phenomenon of imams preaching violence and preaching intolerant views has been around for a very, very long time as well. But for most of that time, those of us who are what I might call enlightened, those who are awake, those who look beyond the propaganda of the mainstream, we've understood that what is happening here is that we have cultures from countries that are for the most part, very poor countries, but often countries that have a lot of resources that have been plundered and exploited by the West, and countries that indeed have been invaded by the West. And not even just recently. I mean, this goes back at least 100 years. I mean, in previous shows, I've looked at the origins of World War I, and the seizing of oil resources has a lot to do with World War I. So we're dealing with cultures that have felt the brunt of Western imperialism for a very, very long time. And of course, these are cultures which have religions within which there are doctrines, there are texts that say a bunch of terrible things. But guess what? There is another religion called Judaism, which has a book called the Talmud, which also says a bunch of pretty shocking things. There is another religion called Christianity, which has a book called the Old Testament, which says a lot of terrible things too. And as I was reading to you there from the article by Glenn Greenwald in the previous segment, there are extremists within both of those other religions, and they have views which are equally intolerant of homosexual people. Now let me just return to the article by Glenn Greenwald, and he's quoted some statistics here, some polls. Now looking at, as I said before, we've got the acceptance of homosexuality among Muslims in the US is higher than a number of other Christian groups. Similarly, US Muslims are more likely to support same-sex marriage than are US evangelicals and Black Protestants and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. And there are the stats right there. So this demonstrates that there is indeed a very moderate element within Islam. But when you see some guy sitting in front of a bunch of people in a mosque, when you see someone who's a cleric, even if he describes himself as moderate, that doesn't mean that he's truly moderate, and that doesn't mean that 90% of Muslims believe what this guy says just because he says that he represents them. Now, just returning here to the article from Glenn Greenwald. Both China and Russia are overwhelmingly non-religious and also vehemently anti-gay. To the extent Russians are religious, they are loyal to the Russian Orthodox Christian Church. In Cameroon, Catholic Church officials continue to spew the most vile and inflammatory anti-gay rhetoric. A prominent evangelical multimillionaire Brazilian pastor with a history of anti-gay rhetoric yesterday attacked the LGBT community for using the Orlando massacre for self-promotion. Over the last several years, Christian zealots in the US have agitated with both activism and money, often successfully, for the implementation of severely repressive anti-LGBT laws in Christian Africa. That includes Uganda, where they tried to implement the death penalty for homosexuals. The death penalty. So this is a Christian country where there was a movement, maybe didn't get all the way, but there was a lot of support for the death penalty for homosexuality. The law that was passed, criminalising homosexuality, has led to severe increases in violent attacks against LGBTs. Now, let's just have a look at a map where we can see the spread of laws in regard to homosexuality. And what you see here on the map here, the different colours, I'll just quickly show you the legend here on the map. Dark blue means marriage is legal. Lighter blue-green, marriage recognised but not performed. Civil unions, registered partnerships. Light blue, unregistered cohabitation. Same-sex unions not recognised. And all the way up to life in prison, red, and death, deep red. So having a look at the map here, we can see that Australia is a country where civil unions and registered partnerships are allowed. We can see, interestingly, we can see Myanmar here, which is predominantly a Buddhist country, is a country where you can get up to life in prison for homosexuality. But we see Indonesia, which is a Muslim country. Homosexuality is legal. The only thing is same-sex unions are not recognised. Now, India, which is a country that has predominantly Hindu, but of course a very large Muslim population as well. But in India, we see imprisonment for homosexuality. In Russia, there are laws restricting the freedom of expression and association of homosexuals. Now, of course, the countries here that are the dark red are the countries where the death penalty is in place for homosexuality. We are going to break. You're with Truth News Radio Australia, and I'll be continuing with this analysis for you when we come back. So stay with us. It's going to be a very important discussion today. Welcome back. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. And I'm going to continue now actually with the article from Glenn Greenwald. I'll just shift now to that screen and we'll have a look at some more interesting data. If you have a look at this information on the left here, these graphs on the left, what you'll see is, should society accept homosexuality? So this is a survey of North America, Latin America, and Africa. Now, in North America, Canada, US, actually, no, those headings are a little bit misleading. Okay, North America is the first section here, then these are other countries in the world. Okay, so in North America, we have a fairly high acceptance of homosexuality. 80% in Canada, 60% in the US. In South Korea, we have a fairly high acceptance. In China, far less. Of course, China, certainly not a Muslim country. Malaysia, a Muslim country with very little acceptance. Indonesia, Muslim country, very little acceptance, although homosexuality is legal in Indonesia. In Latin America, there's a predominantly positive attitude towards homosexuality. But now in Africa, the countries here that you see in Africa that have a very, very low acceptance of homosexuality, you probably think that they're Muslim countries, right? Well, no. These are actually all predominantly Christian countries. And we see in Africa, these Christian countries have almost minuscule acceptance of homosexuality. So just returning here to the article, Glenn Greenwald is acknowledging that deeply anti-LGBT attitudes are pervasive in parts of the Muslim world. But that is also equally true of poor parts of the Christian world, where only tiny parts of the population of largely Christian countries, such as Ghana, Uganda, and Kenya, believe society should accept homosexuality. In other countries that are not predominantly Muslim, China, Russia, Nigeria, El Salvador, and Israel, pluralities similarly oppose the societal acceptance of homosexuality. It is also true that parts of Islamic doctrine contain all sorts of horrible views on LGBTs, women, and other issues. But exactly the same is true of both the Christian Bible and the Jewish Talmud. When it comes to Jews and Christians, people instinctively understand how bigoted and deceitful it is to cherry-pick particularly offensive excerpts from their holy books and use them to demonize all contemporary Jews and Christians. Indeed, a standard tactic of neo-Nazis and other various anti-Semites is to cite ugly excerpts from the Talmud, including ones purportedly endorsing Jews holding non-Jews as slaves or lying to and stealing from non-Jews, as evidence of the dishonesty and untrustworthiness of Jews generally. We all understand that this tactic is so vile, unscholarly, and anti-intellectual, precisely because modern adherents to those religions interpret and imply or ignore those provisions in all sorts of ways. Exactly the same is true of Muslims. Yet an entire cottage industry of pseudo-intellectual charlatans, including ones who admit to never having read the Quran, uses exactly this tawdry tactic to demonize Islam. And he refers here to a social experiment where people are read heinous Bible passages and falsely told that they are from the Quran. There are literally millions upon millions of Muslims who hold positive views about and engage in positive interactions with gay people with regularity, which is why it's almost always true that those most devoted to demonizing Islam are the ones who know the fewest number of Muslims, just as is true of LGBTs, ironically. And indeed, I mean, I've spent time in Indonesia growing up. I spent quite a few years there when I was a teenager, and I learned that Islam in Indonesia is actually very different to Islam in Saudi Arabia. And in countries like Indonesia, where there is a plurality of religions, it is not possible to enforce the kind of societal controls that we do see in these tightly monitored Middle Eastern countries. So having had experience with cultures where Islam is a part of the fabric rather than just like the one dominant meme within a society, you learn that Islam can coexist with other religions and other cultures, and has done so for many hundreds of years all around the world. And as it says here in the article, LGBT Muslims all over the world struggle to meld their identities and religious convictions and navigate various personal conflicts. And just moving forward here in the article, despite all this data, the standard group of hateful polemicists who literally seem to devote their lives to exploiting every news event to attack Islam wasted no time before any facts were known, while the bodies were literally still in the club, squeezing the horrific slaughter in Orlando to depict Muslims as uniquely hateful of LGBTs. Never mind that the suspect showed no signs of religious fanaticism and was, according to numerous close sources, suffering from mental illness, had a history of wife-beating, worked for a major defence mercenary contractor, had no known connection to extremist groups until his 911 call citing ISIS, and was obsessed with joining the NYPD. The opportunity to exploit LGBT suffering to fuel the standard anti-Muslim agenda was far too attractive to resist, no matter how many facts negate it. Try to tell LGBT citizens who grew up in North America or South America or Europe that anti-gay hatred is an exclusive attribute of Islam, and the scorn you'll provoke, grounded in actual personal experience rather than hateful ideology, will be intense. So we need to rethink. I know this is going to be very hard for a lot of people who've really gone down the road now of accepting the anti-Islam rhetoric coming from sources that are supposedly truth-telling sources. But they are leading you up the garden path, ladies and gentlemen. They are not being honest. And this is, to me, the biggest problem, is a problem of honesty. There is a deliberate intent to deceive. And, of course, this dishonest motive, we're seeing a little bit with Donald Trump as well. And I know I've been quite supportive of Donald Trump's campaign, not because of these positions at all, because of other things that Donald Trump supports. But when I saw Donald Trump immediately after the Orlando massacre, immediately stepping up to the podium and using this event to sort of justify his harsh anti-Islam rhetoric and proposed policies, I thought this is disappointing, and this could actually be the end for Donald Trump. I think he may have miscalculated here, and it's not a policy of his that I've ever supported, but it's one that I thought might be mitigated over time. Anyway, we're going to break. I'll get a bit more into that into the next section. You're with Truth News Radio Australia. Stay with us.
React to your problem by saying something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? And at that point...
Welcome back. You're with Truth News Radio. And I'm talking today about issues of Islam and homosexuality. And I want to actually change focus a little for the last section. I did mention there at the end of the last section that I think that there could be some troubles for Donald Trump in his campaign, in that he has jumped on this bandwagon in the wake of this horrific crime, and it may actually backfire for him. And it does make me actually reevaluate some aspects of what he stands for. Of course, I've never had a huge amount of faith in the political system anyway, but I did I did take some interest in Donald Trump, and I still think he has some very interesting policy ideas, and that he would bring about some changes in the world, which could be a positive thing. But it could be that this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, because his position on his position on Islam does actually run counter to the US Constitution. You know, the fundamental, I think it's the First Amendment of the US Constitution, is about religious freedom. So it's very, very important within the history of America to protect religious freedoms. So when we see someone going down the track of negating that while purporting to uphold other constitutional rights, it's a little bit questionable. And also we've seen Donald Trump as well support the banning of people buying guns who are on the terror watch list. And again, this is not a healthy sign at all, because as we know, the terror watch list, of course, he's saying this in relation to the mass shooting that we saw. And a lot of people would say, yes, well, of course, someone who's on a terror watch list shouldn't be able to buy a gun. But what is a terror watch list? Well, it's a completely arbitrary and secret list that anyone can be added to without due process. And Senator Ted Kennedy was on it at one point. So when we see Donald Trump blindly sort of advocating that people who are on this list shouldn't be allowed to buy weapons, again, this could be a sign that the Trump campaign is going in a wrong direction. Let's hope that they recover from that, because I still think there is a lot to be said for it, and obviously the alternative in the US is pretty shocking. So, but anyway, let's actually turn to another issue, and this relates back to Australia. An Islamic cleric by the name of Farooq Sekaleshvar left Australia under threat of expulsion last week. I think the government had already decided to revoke his visa, because it turned out that this cleric had been in Orlando and had been preaching anti-gay rhetoric. And he'd been doing it in Australia, he'd been doing it in the US, he's been travelling around the world doing it. And I'm going to actually play to you a little clip of one of his lectures, which was actually recorded on YouTube. Here we go.
Death is the sentence. I mean, look, there's nothing to be embarrassed about this. That death is the sentence.
Here's a story you won't see anywhere else. A Muslim scholar says killing homosexuals is the compassionate thing to do. And he's just hours away from speaking at an Islamic center right here in Central Florida. Channel 9's Field Sutton's been trying to find out why the group invited him to Sanford.
Off camera, one of the people who is a member here told me that Sheikh Farooq Sekaleshvar's speech last night on women's issues was well received and not particularly controversial, but we already know that many people in the Sanford area and around Central Florida are upset about what is coming tonight.
Yeah, I'll ask him.
Seminole County resident.
Okay, I'll just leave it there. So this was actually prior to the Orlando shooting. And so the fact that this man was associated with this rhetoric, it may indeed have had an influence on the killer. We can't say for sure. But it turned out that Sekaleshvar was in Australia just last week. And he was interviewed by the ABC. And I'm going to play to you some of that clip. Now, there are longer clips. I unfortunately haven't been able to source the longer clip that shows Sekaleshvar saying the particularly vile and hideous things that he does say. I've got the full extended YouTube of it. It's just very hard to actually find the specific part of it where he makes the statements that are so obnoxious. The lecture that he gave that was recorded, for the most part, is actually presented in a very polite, very nice terms. He doesn't seem like an aggressive, fanatical individual. But when he does get to that particular part of it that refers to Islamic law and the will of Allah in regard to homosexuals who have been proven to have engaged in sodomy by 4 witnesses. He says that the penalty is death, and he actually says that that this is compassionate. He said that this is done out of compassion. Now, I'm presenting this here to show that I'm not in any way an apologist for the wicked aspects of this religion and the damage that they are doing in Australia. And I'll just play to you here from the interview that was done with the Sheikh as he was about to board a plane to leave Australia.
Well, he is of the opinion that his comments were set, excuse me, there's a plane going overhead as we speak, but he basically says that him condoning the death of homosexuals pertains to a specific aspect of Islamic law in a specific circumstance that doesn't apply to what happened in Orlando, and that was essentially how he reasoned his way out of it. He literally told me that what he was referring to was a homosexual sex act in public in a certain country that has a certain Islamic law mandated by the people, and that would therefore be justified. However, he believes that what happened in Orlando is not the same and doesn't condone that. In fact, he believes that the guy that did what he did in Orlando was perverted. So it was a bizarre kind of a justification, but that's the one he gave.
Now, you did speak to him earlier today. I gather at the time there was no suggestion he was going to leave the country so abruptly.
No, he was happy to stay. He made it clear to me when we spoke that should there be any change to his visa, that he would respect the laws of the land, making the point that, you know, the whole point of his speech was about the laws of the land from which he comes, and therefore if, you know, it happens to be that our laws don't fit him, he would leave. So I did speak to him earlier. It was a fairly extensive interview. He was keen to put everything into context as far as he was concerned, and this is what he had to say. Sheikh.
Oh. Hi there.
Hi.
How
Nice
are
to
you?
meet you, James Thomas.
Nice to meet you, thank you.
I guess I should really start by saying I've seen that you did say what you said, so
Yes.
so why? Why do you say these things?
Well, 3 years ago, in the University of Michigan, a very notable university, I was invited to give a speech explaining what Islamic law has to say on the question of homosexuality. I was invited. It was an academic setting. There were all kinds of people, Muslims, non-Muslims, heads of department there. Everyone was there. No one booed me. Everyone knew it was academic. You know, I'm not... By its very nature, in an academic setting, it never qualifies that one wants to incite hatred, because it's all about academia. When does this question of death theoretically arise? It arises in one particular scenario, and it's such a small probability that I've never even heard of such a scenario arising, where in such a country with such a mandate, where the rule of law is Islam, here homosexuals come in the public in such a country and commit what? Not just, you know, hugging one another, committing anal copulation in public. No one does that. Homosexuals don't do that.
If they did,
if they were...
Okay, well, I just wanted to share that with you because this is something that took place in Australia, and clearly this what this man is saying is wrong, and I'm not going to even qualify it by saying that his position is somewhat fringe. I think that the views that he's expressing are indeed held by a lot of Muslims. And we need to reject this authoritarian, totalitarian attitude where, you know, it is believed that the state can just basically extinguish someone's life on the basis of an action that is not harming anyone, that is only an action between consenting adults. This is totally incompatible with modern democratic societies. It's completely incompatible with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But this is where, in Australia, we do have a bit of a problem, because these types of people are regularly allowed into Australia and are lecturing all over the place and are not interfered with at all. The only reason this guy was kicked out of the country was because he came up on US news as being associated with the Orlando massacre. But I guarantee there's been many more like him. And we have very strict anti-vilification laws in Australia. But for some reason, these people from the Muslim sector of the community go under the radar. So, notwithstanding everything I said in the first part of the show, this is something that needs to be stamped out. I mean, this is about freedom. This is about the core principles of what I stand for and what this show stands for, about freedom and human rights. So that's our show for this week. I do hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be back next week. See you then.